Hello everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Let's Just Natter a Bit about Morrowind. Hope you're all well, thank you for tuning in. In this video there'll be no gameplay, I'm just going to talk about your comments, discuss them a bit, how I think things are going, and then we're going to read this here book that I forgot last time, but that's fine, because there was loads of reading last time. I'm going to change the title of these and get a better thumbnail for these videos, because it was ugly, but you know, can you guys think of like a different thing to call these? I'm going to call this episode sort of Let's Discuss Morrowind rather than Let's Read, because we're not just reading all the time, so it was kind of misleading. But anyway, hello. So your feedback. You guys obviously really enjoyed last video. I did as well. I thought it was. I really enjoyed recording it. As indeed, I do record. You know, I enjoy recording these every week. I record them on Fridays when I get home from work, pretty much. So it's a nice sort of like kickstart to the weekend. And yeah, so far I haven't had any massive frustrations. Boney obviously is one, and yes, haha, the fact that he only lasts 15 seconds. Yeah, apart from that, you know, the fact that it takes him 10 seconds to start attacking. On that, actually, somebody said the code patch 2.4 fixes it, or at least should do, but it doesn't. It may well work for companions and followers and such, but yeah, I have that installed, and currently it's a little bit clunky, as we know. On to, I guess, the points that you guys are raising, and it's really nice, you know, you guys are sort of buying into this, and you're giving your feedback and you know, about how Karish would act, and you're asking questions about him, and so you're really interested in sort of how the game is played and the character as a whole. So it's really nice. I'm really glad to do these videos, and that they're actually you know, they have some content, which is great. So let's just get in there with the first comment, which asked about Karish's relationship and sort of attitude to other races, because there is an element of Altmer society which is sort of like high elf supremacists. He's not that, so he has quite a relaxed attitude towards other races, and the thing is, like it's difficult for me, because there are certain, like, when you come to role playing, a lot of people have like a line that they don't want to draw, you know, and with me, like, it would to play a racist character. I mean, when it comes to, like, you know, like a race of monsters he especially doesn't like, then fair enough. But when it sort of like hits that real world sort of you know, that nerve, I couldn't play like a character who was racist, you know, against red guards or whatever. It would just be too weird for me. It would be too odd and too, yeah, poignant, I suppose. So I wouldn't want to do it. So he's one of the more relaxed Altmer. Although, I mean, he does see himself as you know, he's quite arrogant, but he's arrogant, you know, towards everybody, as opposed to that. As far as like, but that sort of like ties into the slaves thing, because he kind of realizes that slavery is a thing, and I don't think he has anything against the beast races per se. It's just that they are slaves in this universe, so that's just what they are, and it's sort of normal, isn't it? It's a given, especially in Morrowind. But I heard from somebody else that Altmer, they keep slaves. Maybe for other races as well. I'm not sure, but pretty much, yeah, slaves, you know, are slaves. But it's not the fact that they are of a particular race, just because they're kind of slaves. If that doesn't make sense, then fair enough. But I don't want to go down the whole he doesn't like a particular kind of race thing. I'm not comfortable with it, so I don't want to do it. So slaves are a thing. That you know, just like a door is a door, you know. It's like a slave is just there in the world, and it has no real feelings one way or another, because that's just how things are. But yeah, he sort of treats everybody with the equal amount of disdain, I suppose. Okay, next thing, more of a gameplay type thing. Making my own scrolls is a good idea. Yeah, it was always my intention. I never really mentioned scrolls in particular. And I think, like, initially we'll focus on items that we can use more than once because his resources are kind of finite. But I'm pretty confident that we'll get to a stage eventually of when we're quite rich and quite powerful and can kind of do what we want, and then we'll start making scrolls that we can use to fire off spells without a magicka cost and summons and such as the commenter mentioned. So yeah, scrolls are definitely are going to be a thing, part of his sort of like magic item repertoire. But he's going to focus on magic items first. But before he focuses on that, we got to focus on the spells that he needs. And we're slowly but surely gaining the spells that he needs. Very slowly. So that's why it's taken a while to kick all that in. But yeah, somebody else mentioned that they kind of liked the survivability, I guess, yeah, I suppose the survivability aspect of it all, with him having to buy food and rest and everything, and that's always a sap on his resources. And in the main game, that has, in the sort of default vanilla game, that has no bearing whatsoever. And now, even though it's not a massive thing, it's still something that he has to bear in mind, because he doesn't have a place. He's of no fixed address, so he keeps having to rent rooms, and that nicely links into another comment which said pretty much either if I wanted to I could sleep in the Mages Guild. I know, Verax, but yeah, Karish wouldn't do that. It's kind of a public place. I mean, he has a big trouble sleeping in places without a door, and I don't think he's particularly modest, but at the same time he wants privacy when he's asleep. As most of us do, really, don't we? We'd always prefer that, so does Karish, and he always prefers to spend a little bit more, even if it is 10 gold, to get that. So that's what he does. If he's really, really desperate, then absolutely. He'd rather have a bed in the Mages Guild, which somebody else might have slept in the night before and might not be particularly clean and stuff. For the 10 gold, we can kind of assume that the bed is relatively clean, at least for Morrowind, which I don't think would be very clean at all, to be quite frank with you, but we're working with the game here, and that's all we can get. But only in dire circumstances would he resort to, like, the, dormitory sort of, like, thing. He'd much rather have his own room with a door, and preferably, with some furniture in it and stuff as well, which he's found on occasion. But eventually, we're going to have to get this guy a couple of places of his own. I say that because it's relatively easy to find abodes within the game. If you clear out, say, a dungeon or whatever, one of those Telvanni towers, if we ever go into one of them and clear it out, then that can be his place until we get Tel Ervith, I believe it's called, the Telvanni stronghold. But even that's kind of remote, so whenever we can get a place of our own, we will, and we're going to populate that with food and stuff, and get him a proper kitchen and everything. So I'm kind of looking forward to that when the opportunity strikes, and it hasn't yet. But when it does, that maybe that club in Balmora with the bad people in it, that's always a favourite of mine because it's so handy. Only thing is, it's handy because it's near the Silt Strider, and it doesn't use Silt Striders. But even so, having a place to rest in Balmora is always good. So going a bit of a tangent here, of course, whispering on, but long and short of it is he prefers to have his own place to rest, and right now he's willing to pay the 10 gold to do it. But in an emergency, he will sleep in sort of a dormitory shared accommodation type thing, rather than on the streets or whatever. 1 point magic spells. Somebody suggested rather than the bow, to aggro the summons that we get, why don't we just use a 1 point spell to target an enemy? And I really like that idea, actually, because I don't think the spell particularly needs to be a destruction spell, which is my initial thought, was that, just do 1 point of fire damage. But that's not really Karish's deal, but it doesn't have to be that. And, it could be something like disintegrate armor, it could be lower fatigue, something like that, and that would work really well. And that's all well and good for untouch, but he doesn't like getting close to his enemies, so I think the bow will still be his primary way of doing that. But absolutely, that's a good suggestion, that, and I will be using that, at least in theory, to make the summons attack the enemies that we find. Yeah, and eventually I want him to like hover out the way and everything, and just let the summons do the work, and he'll pelt them with arrows and spells and whatever else. Maybe paralyze the enemy. Maybe that's a good way of doing it, and then his summon can just wail on it. But that all seems like a very long way away, to be quite frank with you. And that's kind of nice, that we're very slowly gaining power. The final point was going to Port Telvannis, which I'm assuming is somewhere around here or down here or something. It's on the mainland. We haven't explored the mainland at all, and this is the first time it's actually been mentioned. Yes, he would obviously like to go to these places, but we're going to wait until a certain point that we feel that I feel that it's sort of needed in the LP. I mean, for now we're finding lots of new places on Vardenfell, so he doesn't need to find all of this as well. But absolutely, he'll go and look at those, especially like Paul Telvannis when he feels he's important enough. I know that sounds quite weird because Karish has a high degree of self-importance, but within Telvanni culture, he kind of realizes that he's a dog's body right now. And I'll go on to that in a little bit in my own thoughts, but so when he gets a bit more important, he'll go to Port Telvannis and have a look around there and see what we can find there. And somebody else mentioned that a good time to do that would be when he starts getting mentioned as being the Nerevarine in the main quest. You might get a bit freaked out by that and going, hang on, I don't have anything to do with this, I think I'll take a break, have a vacation over on the mainland. So that may well be a good time to do that. So good shout. So that's sort of all your feedback and everything, and I do really appreciate that. I'll say nothing derogatory at all. It was all just helpful, like advice and hints and suggestions. I love that, like you guys are, like I say, buying into this and have ideas about how he could, tweak my playstyle to him and everything. All good with that. Keep them coming. Really like these suggestions. And while I won't use them all, because not everybody can agree on a certain thing. Someone might think that the 1 point spell thing is a terrible idea, but I'll use my better judgment. I am Karish after all. So, but having you guys input in that really helps me sort of round out his playstyle, his character, and the questions like how does he feel about the beast races and other races. Let me get an insight into him that ask questions that I wouldn't have asked myself. So yeah, feel free to keep asking those when you feel that it's relevant. So my thoughts on the LP are, like I say, really enjoy playing this. Struggling through, bumbling through. Indeed, one person said that they really like how I somehow managed to accomplish these goals even with the bare minimum of equipment, and sort of like maybe manipulate the game with my own knowledge, which I think really helps this sort of playthrough. And yeah, with you with that. The way that I somehow managed to get through everything somehow is really satisfying. And when I can't, that's just part of life, isn't it? We can't overcome every obstacle that we come up against, but maybe he'll come back and stronger and everything for it. My kind of worry is that not so much that it's too slow, but I worry that with the game as it is, I worry that I won't be able to afford all the spells that I want, which I know sounds strange, but he doesn't really loot too much. Having said that, we haven't really gone into like a proper dungeon or tower or anything, because he wouldn't really loot anything that was dirty. But when we were talking about sort of all Telvanni towers, and when you're looking at like all the loot that wizards have on their tables and everything, he'd take that, no problem. So I can see us getting like a major haul at one point somehow in a quest, and then sort of like set ourselves on the route. But we'll have to earn that, and that's the whole point, is that we'll really have to knuckle down and get some major questing done. And speaking of which, next episode my plan is to start the main quest. As I alluded to the end of last video, we're a bit sort of downhearted, or at least Karish is, with downtrodden with the state of things with House Telvanni, and he kind of recognises that he has to build himself up from the bottom. But going into all that mucky water last episode, it sort of made him a bit disillusioned about House Telvanni. So he's established his alias there, which is what he was told to do by Caius. So next he's going to go back and visit him. Yeah, we can afford to. And maybe get a new robe as well, I always say that. And start that. So we're going to be venturing into... We know what it all is. We all know it's the Dwemer puzzle box. Now, I personally do not remember where the puzzle box is. I have a vague idea, obviously, because I found it multiple times in the past, but I haven't played this for a very long time, so it's very vague in my head. So it's going to be interesting. Really interesting. So that's going to be our first major visit to a dungeon. So that should be a lot of fun, shouldn't it? But yeah, my thoughts basically are you guys have been really supportive and great, and I really like the feedback you're giving me. And you're obviously really liking it because you're watching it and you're watching this, so thanks very much. And the playthrough is going pretty much exactly how I wanted. Maybe a little surprised about how difficult it is to get some money behind me and buy some spells, but that's no bad thing when I think about it. He's still relatively new. I mean, I don't know how long we've been here. Maybe a week. In fact, it should say in the journal. All right, 2 weeks almost. Well, 10 days. We've been on Morrowind, and I think that's about right. 10 days is about the right pace for somebody who's doing everything every day. We might even have a day off at some point. How about that? Might have a day off and just do nothing. Not that'll be an entire episode, but just wait for 24 hours. I think he deserves that, so we might actually do that. I might go to Balmora, take the day off, and then go and see Caius just for a break, because this guy, while he's been having sort of regular sleep and everything, it's been a rough time for him. So I might just give him a little bit of a break and have a day off. At the 8 plates or whatever. We'll see. Alright, but anyway, yeah, thanks very much. Right, I am going to now, after a brief jump cut, read this book right here. It's a long one. Dancing Fire, Chapter 2, by Wagin Jarth. It was a complete loss. The Carthay Rat had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in the caravan in just a few minutes' time. Decimus Scotty, wagonload of wood he had hoped to trade with the Bosmer, had been set on fire and been toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into the mud of dirt mixed with spilt wine. All the pilgrims, merchants and adventurers in the group moaned and wept as they gathered the remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of dawn. I best not tell anyone that I managed to hold on to my notes for the translation of the Minoriad play bar, whispered the poet Griff Malon. They'd probably turn on me. Scotty politely declined the opportunity of telling Malon just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse. 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. Doesn't Karish know it? Hoi! Came a cry from the wood. A small party of Bosmer emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. Friend or foe? Neither, growled the convoy head. You must be the Cyrodiils, laughed the leader of the group, a tall, skeleton, thin youth with a sharp, vulpine face. We heard you were en route, evidently. So did our enemies. I thought the war was over, muttered one of the caravan's now ruined merchants. The Bosmer laughed again. No act of war, just a little border enterprise. Are you going on to Falin Esti? I'm not, the convoy head shook his head. As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan, just a fat profit lost to me. The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. All these were now new times of peace, he said, rather than... if these were the new times of peace, he said, he'd rather come back for the next war. Scotty tried a different route and approached the Bosmer. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice, the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. I don't suppose you consider escorting me to Falin Esti. I'm a representative of the important imperial agency, the Atreus Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Khajiit brought your province. Patriotism. 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear if you have any left, replied the Bosmer. Scotty reflected that negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went his way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among those without funds was the poet, who appealed for Scotty for assistance. I'm sorry, Griff. I only have 14 gold left over, not even enough for a decent room when I get to Falinesti. I would really help if I could, said Scotty, persuading himself that it was true. Aww. But yeah, this is all to do with we've seen the end of Scotty's story, which is a shame, but now we're seeing, these are all preludes. Prequels. The band of 6 and their Bosmer escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time, they were deep in the jungles of Valenwood. A never-ending canopy of hues of browns and greens obscured the sky. A millennia's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, wormy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed wading through the slime. For several more, they took a labyrinthian path across fallen branches and the low-hanging bluffs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmer host moved so fast. The Cyrodiils struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. His fellow provincials had to help him up. The Bosmer paused only a moment, their eyes continually darting the shadows in the trees above before moving on at their usual expeditious pace. What are they so nervous about? Wheezed the merchant irritably. More Cathay rats? Don't be ridiculous, laughed the Bosmer unconvincingly. Khajiit this far into Valenwood? In times of peace, they'd never dare. When the group passed a high above the stump, when the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotty felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exertion without food was not part of his regimen, and as a comfortably played clerk, he pondered, feeling somewhat delirious, how long they had been trotting through the jungle. 12 hours? 20? A week? Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent moles on the trees and the muck below provided the only regular illumination. Is it all possible for us to rest and eat? He hollered up to his host ahead. We're near to Falinesti, came the echoing reply. Lots of food there. The path continued upwards for several hours more across a clot of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second bluffs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travellers found themselves midway up a waterfall that fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the stacks of rock, agonizing foot by foot. Bosmer escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotty kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and the river water from his eyes. Falinesti spread across the horizon before him. Sprawling across both banks of the river stood the mighty Grat Oak City, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before their king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with a gorgeous crown of gold and green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotty had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. There you are, said the leader of the escorts. Not too far a walk. You should begin at wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province. Scotty was lost as to how to proceed. The sight of the vertical metropolis, where people moved about like ants, disorientated all his sensibilities. You wouldn't know of an inn called... He paused for a moment and then pulled Duris's letter from his pocket. Something like Mother Pascot's Tavern? Mother Pascot? The leader Bosmer laughed his familiar contemptuous laugh. You won't want to stay there. Visitors always prefer the Elysia hill atop the high bluffs. It's expensive but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pascot's Tavern. If you've made up your mind to go, take a lift to Havel's Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the Western Cross. This apparently... Alright, I'll have to stop for a drink. This apparently struck the youth's friends as a very witty jest, and so it was with their laughter echoing behind him that Scotty crossed the writhing root system to the base of Felinesti. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment a glass or bone would plummet from far above, so he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the slick trunk of the city with perfect grace, manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox's belly. Scotty approached his nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. "I was wondering if you might take me to Havel's Slump." The mayor nodded, and within a few minutes' time, Scotty was 200 feet in the air at a rook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of moss stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a sharing roof of several dozen small buildings. There was only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotty tipped the Fanasi platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pascott's tavern. "Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there," the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. Everyone in Havel's Slump has revelry. I think that's Monday. Scotty walked carefully along the narrow street. Though the ground felt as solid as marble avenues of the Imperial City, there were slick cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops into the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotty only a few minutes of contemplation to raise up in alarm. A jolly little raft anchored down the stream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it, but it hadn't moved at all. He had, together with everything around him. It was no metaphor. The city of Felinesti walked, and considering its size, it moved quickly. Scotty rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place on an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotty had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and a singer perched in an offshoot above the crowd. They were largely Bosmer, true natives clad in colourful leather and bones, with a close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another, were a hideous ape people. A few heads bobbing over the tops of the crowd belonged not, as Scotty first assumed, to very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. "Care for some mutton?" queried a wizened old mare who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot Scots. Scotty quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece and another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotty began choking on a piece of gristle and handed him a mug of frothing white drink. He drank it and felt a quiver run down his body as if he was being tickled. "What is that?" Scotty asked. "Jagger, fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it and a bit more mutton for another gold." Scotty agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker, Iodis Yarius, a man who had told him to come to Valewood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was quite empty, Scotty stopped looking for Urius. When it was half empty, he was dancing within the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the fencework. At 3/4 empty, he was trading jokes with a group of creatures whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring, while the revelry continued on around his supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotty had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favour, but a pain like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down, while a central spiral-bladed cortex of a mouth tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. He had found its meal and was going to finish it. "It's over," thought Scotty wildly. "I should never have left home." I could have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Vanek. I could have begun again as a junior clerk and worked my way back up. Suddenly the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. "Got one!" cried a voice, not too distantly. For a moment Scotty lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eye he saw movement. Another of the horrible monsters was scurrying towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bow cracking and an arrow pierced the second insect. "Good shot," tried another voice. "Get the first one again. I just saw it move a little." This time Scotty felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously he tried sliding a foot out and rolling under, but the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows was launched forth. Now the beast was sufficiently perforated so pools of its blood, and like the blood of his victims, began to seep out onto Scotty's body. When Scotty was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the Imperial arena for the competitions of war. He recalled a great veteran of the fights when asked, telling him his secret. "Whenever I'm in doubt of what to do, I have a shield. I stay behind it." Scotty followed that advice. After an hour, when he no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remains of the bug and left as quickly as he could to his stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers and had their bows pointed in his direction, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the Horvars if you drunks keep feeding them?" Scotty shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend to Havel's slump. He was blooded and torn and tired, and he had far too much prevented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into the Mother Pascott's tavern, a dank pace, wet with sap, smelling of mildew. "My name is Decimus Scotty," he said. "I was hoping you have someone named Yaria staying here." "Decimus Scotty?" pondered the fleshy proprietress, Mother Pascott herself. "I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left a note for. Let me go see if I can find it." "Ah, Scotty, what adventures you've been on." Again, that was a great little story. I think that increased Mercantile? I'm not entirely sure. We've definitely read it, but I don't see how, because he didn't really... maybe it's just like you don't overspend on things. Because, yeah, that pig's milk, good stuff apparently. Alright, everybody, thank you for watching this episode of Let's Discuss, chat about natter, gossip, about Karish and Morrowind. I shall hopefully see you on Sunday for another episode. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and toodaloo.